music up. Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. I'm going to stream like the last, I don't know, hour. Who knows how long it's going to be until they actually do the vote on the articles of impeachment. For those of you that are unaware, there have been a few debates happening, like super long, hours long, lengthy debates between the Republicans and the Democrats in the Judiciary Committee regarding the articles of impeachment. They did a long debate for amendments on the articles, and I believe they decided against any sort of amendment to be present, and so now they are debating on the articles themselves, and they will do a vote, and then after that point, if it gets approved and gets enough votes, then the impeachment trial will be sent to the Senate. And it was apparently, according to like one Republican politician, I heard them say that it was Nancy Pelosi that was the one talking about impeachment by Christmas. And I still don't think that that's going to happen. Even if they get the vote sent to the Senate, I mean, I think it's going to, it's going to take a little bit longer than that probably. I mean, they spend a whole day doing debates, So I'm going to stream however long until that happens. They've been debating all day. Whatever. It's a lot of the monotonous, same kinds of things that you've probably already heard, but I did want to be able to stream the actual vote part. So I hope that you're all having a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do so, and hit the little bell notification so that you don't miss our content and our live streams and things like that. And you can follow us on Twitter at DailyGreensnips is our handle, and you can check out our website, thedailygreens.org, for all kinds of good resources and information for other independent journalists and alternative media types. Alrighty, so I'm just going to go switch on over to this, and if anybody has any questions or any comments or anything, go ahead and just, try to hit me up in the chat room that we have going, but I might not respond very quickly because I do have to go make dinner and, do family stuff too. So, just to warn you all, I might not be, super responsive, but I will try. Okie dokie. I hope y'all enjoy this.
Reviewed the facts and evidence as a former federal prosecutor. I've read the transcripts. I've watched the hearings. I've read the whistleblower report. That has not been met here. In addition, this process has lacked fairness, due process, and transparency. We shouldn't be here tonight doing this. This is a travesty.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's unbelievable. The few Americans that are going to be watching this, because they know what the outcome is. We all know what the outcome is. They're wondering why are we trying to negate the vote of 63 million Americans instead of talking about the things that Americans care about. Prescription drug coverage, the high cost of prescription drugs, the high cost of health care, securing our borders, keeping our economy going. These are the things we should be talking about. No, instead, we're going to pass this resolution tonight and then go home for Christmas vacation instead of doing the job of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Watkins.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I was a political newcomer before this, and just like President Trump, perhaps like me, he was naive to think that this House, that in the people's house, everybody was true and just. It's not the case. Democrats weren't saddened by this solemn day. They weren't waiting for all the evidence. This was always about politics, because they loathe the president, because he didn't play by their Beltway rules. I should have known. But the fact is, Kansas is better, the U.S. is better, and the world is better because of Donald Trump.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
Gentleman's
Thank you.
recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My friends on the other side of the aisle have been clamoring for this day since President Trump was elected. The refusal to accept the election results and later the findings of the Mueller investigation have brought forth articles of impeachment that are negated by two simple facts. Namely, the military aid to Ukraine was provided and no investigation was ever started. The real offense is that the president won the election, and their fear is that he'll win again despite all their efforts. I will vote against the partisan attempt to overturn an election. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to impeachment against President Donald Trump. This is based on hearsay that were made by partisan witness behind closed doors. This impeachment is a sham, Madam Speaker, and has divided this country. Congress has wasted time on this impeachment and would have been better used on addressing issues that are facing Americans, like securing our southern border, the opioid epidemic, or establishing a constitutionally mandated budget. And now American workers have to wait until the Senate trial to pass the USMCA that the President and the House Republicans have been working on for over a year. I'm disappointed in the path Congress chose to go down, Madam Speaker. And for the record, Madam Speaker, I think you're doing a wonderful job.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. It's obvious today that there's an intense hatred from the Democrats of President Donald Trump. Why do they hate the man so much? Maybe it's because of the out-of-control government gone wild, the abuses of FISA, the abuses by the FBI, the abuses in the State Department. Many of these, maybe it's just the previous administration they're trying to cover up. It's sad. This is a shameful act of what we're doing today. Shame on the Democrats. Shame on pursuing this. I ask everybody to vote no and to take notice of who votes for these articles of impeachment.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a sad day for America. We know this impeachment is a sham. They know this impeachment is a sham. They know we know this impeachment is a sham. And they know that most of the American people know that this impeachment is a shameful sham. We know that it began the moment the president was elected, long before he ever had a telephone call with any foreign leaders. We've heard the numerous quotations from them that validate those very points. And yet they persist in trying to overturn the duly elected president of the United States of America's election. When the president calls for
Gentleman
an
from California.
Madam Speaker, I've heard several of my colleagues in a row now, and it's interesting to see how very few of them want to address any of the facts of the president's misconduct, nor do they wish to defend, nor do they wish, apparently, Madam Speaker, I've struck a nerve, nor do they wish to defend a president who would extort an ally, withhold military aid to help him cheat in an election. They don't want to defend that conduct. So instead they say, oh, Democrats really want to impeach the president, or Democrats don't like the president. But what they can't say is that this president's conduct was ethical. What they can't say was that this president's conduct was legal. What they can't say was this president's conduct was constitutional. What they can't say is this president has upheld his oath of office. No, they can't say that. All they can say is, we don't like the process, or our colleagues are just too happy to impeach, or it's overturning the will of the public when it's a Republican president. Interestingly, my colleagues who supported the impeachment of Bill Clinton did not think it was overturning the will of the people. Apparently, this impeachment provision only overturns the will of the people if it's a Republican president. I would like to give them more credit than that. What is the distinction here is the seriousness of the conduct. This remedy was put in the Constitution for a reason. It's not an unconstitutional remedy. It is part of the Constitution. The only way you can conceive of this remedy as being unconstitutional is if you believe, as the president does, that he is the state, that anything that opposes him opposes the state, is by definition anti-constitutional. But that, of course, is nonsense. But it is more than nonsense. It is dangerous nonsense. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the people of Washington's 8th District sent me to Congress to fight for their families and make thoughtful, evidence-based decisions. I did not come to Congress to impeach a president, but evidence is evidence, and a balance of powers is fundamental to our democracy. On my first day in office, like everybody else here, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect our country. History will judge this moment. Given all the facts before us, impeachment is the only remedy. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure it did strike a chord with the chairman since, he showed up a little late, hadn't heard all the arguments. We beat the facts back all the time. It is the majority side that had to run through this. That clock and that calendar are killing him, and it's killing him because his arguments are falling flat. And to speak of evidence, yeah, we looked at the evidence. The evidence doesn't fit anything. And by the way, if he had extortion, put it in articles. He can't because he can't make the case. He can only put it in his notes and then come to the mic when he can't be questioned and talk about it. That's the problem, and that's the chord that's been struck. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once President Trump was sworn in, articles of impeachment were introduced almost immediately. In 3 years, House Democrats have introduced 10 resolutions, gaining support of over 100 of their members, and all of that before a July 25th phone call. But also during that time, the Russia conspiracy hoax was exposed. Obstruction of justice charges were abandoned after the Mueller hearings fell flat. So after 2 years, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 warrants, and 17 lies in a FISA warrant application, they had nothing to show for it. Undeterred by the facts and uninterested in governing, the beat marched on. So here we are today. We have no quid pro quo, no bribery, no extortion, no crimes alleged in the articles at all. But don't worry, because we have a brand new 632-page report alleging all kinds of things, some for the very first time. This isn't a somber, solemn process. This is a political drive-by. They just want President Trump gone. But this never-ending march towards overturning the 2016 election has consequences, because you're telling 63 million voters that that you don't respect their vote. Voters in states like mine, who not that long ago used to send Democrats to this august chamber, but recently have found no home in the Democratic Party, who feel that their values have been replaced by a liberal elitist agenda, who feel that partisan points are more important than practical solutions. Your never-ending impeachment quest is a constant reminder to them that you don't trust their judgment, you don't understand their way of life, and you couldn't care less about the issues that are important to them. As Chairman Nadler has so ominously stated, if you're serious about removing a president from office, what you're really doing is overturning the results of the last election. Well, they were serious. They spent the last 3 years talking about it, unwilling to accept the results of 2016. I wonder if my colleagues recognize the irony that their impeachment vendetta is the greatest election interference of all, and it was homegrown right here in the halls of Congress. And with that, I yield
Members
back.
are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we reserve the balance for time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
The gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
This impeachment is an embarrassment for House Democrats. On the substance, Dems claim that their case is uncontested, relying on presumptions, hearsay, and 3% of the story, trying to connect dots that aren't actually connected. Some inconvenient truths. President Zelensky didn't know that there was a hold on aid until August 29th. The aid gets released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine didn't have to do anything in order to get that aid released. Now, President Zelensky says no demand, no quid pro quo, no pressure. But Democrats want the public to ignore the other 97% of the story. See, it doesn't work like that. Senate Democrats want new witnesses to show why there was a hold on aid. Odd request if you think you've already proven your case. Now, at the heart of this debate, two investigations are being discussed between countries. Democrats and media allies want the public to believe it's all just debunked that Ukrainians interfered in the 2016 election. They want you to ignore Avakov and Charlie's comments that Chalupa worked with the Ukrainian embassy, origins of the Steele dossier, the Black Ledger, and more. The problem with all of this is that the American public are smarter than Democrats are giving them credit for. Next, The Democrats claim Republicans are arguing that it was Ukraine and not Russia that wanted to interfere and was interfering in the 2016 election. No, that is not what Republicans are saying. And of course, we have the Burisma-Biden issue of a corrupt Ukrainian energy company run by a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch hiring Hunter Biden at least $50,000 per month with no energy experience and no Ukraine experience solely because he is VP Biden's son. Now, the company wanted to hire Hunter Biden because they wanted to curry favor. There was this ongoing corruption investigation. Enter Joe Biden. He gets that prosecutor fired, threatening the loss of $1 billion if it didn't happen immediately, which it was. Now, Democrats believe Burisma and Biden should be immune from scrutiny. I disagree. Never again should that conflict of interest ever happen. And our governments should be working together to get to the bottom of all of this. This has also been a total disaster on the process, from getting a federal worker to file a whistleblower complaint to Schiff's version made up of the July 25th call. In closed-door interviews, Schiff was prosecutor, judge, jury, and witness coach. Every day, he loved getting America drunk on his favorite cocktail, 3 ingredients: cherry-picking leaks, withholding key facts, and misstating evidence. In the depositions and in the public hearings, the President Counsel was not invited to attend, present evidence, or cross-examine witnesses, and Republicans weren't allowed to call witnesses like Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and many others. Then there was the House Judiciary debacle, where Schiff couldn't even show up to present his reports. He had to have one of his staffers present it for him. This impeachment is ripping our country in half. It's fatally flawed on the process, the substance, the intentions, and the consequences.
Gentleman's time's
It's a total
expired.
Schiff show. I encourage all my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman from California.
I thank the Speaker. We continue to reserve the balance of our
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, today, as we sit here debating impeachment, you know, they all want to talk about it's the Constitution. It's Alexander Hamilton. You know, the last 30 days, I've heard more about Hamilton from my Democrat colleagues, and until then, the closest they ever came to Hamilton was a $10 bill. I mean, you know, all of a sudden, what we have is these strict constitutionalists on the other side of the aisle. Listen, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has nothing to do with anything but raw politics. You know, there's only one person on the other side of the aisle that got 7 Pinocchios for not telling the truth. No one on this side of the aisle got that during this impeachment process, Madam Speaker. And the American people need to understand 2 key facts. The Democrats in control set their own rules of evidence. They said what we need to do for impeachment is to have compelling evidence and bipartisan support. Well, they don't have either of those 2 things. They failed the rules that they made up themselves. We've got President Zelensky of Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 2 guy in Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 3 guy in Ukraine, no pressure. These are the supposed victims of this alleged crime. And yet here we are supposedly having this compelling evidence and facts when the best witness they have, the very best witness they had to change his testimony twice. They mentioned him 611 times. And ultimately, he said, I presume that that's what the president meant. You know, I can tell you that there are not facts here to support it, but what is more important than that, Madam Speaker, is this. Because here we are today, we have bipartisan opposition to impeachment, not bipartisan support. You know, my colleagues opposite want the American people to think that this is a sad and somber day. Well, this is a sad day. It's a sad day for this institution because we've lowered the bar to impeach a president that continues to give us an economy that not only is growing, but growing at levels that we have never seen in the history of our country. When we look at unemployment at a level that is truly remarkable, they want to impeach. But it's another sad day because now what they're doing is they're telling the American people that 233 Democrats deserve to decide who the President of the United States should be and disenfranchise 63 million voters. When all is said and done, when the history of this impeachment is written, it will be said that my Washington Democrat friends couldn't bring themselves to work with Donald Trump, so they consoled themselves instead by silencing the will of those who did, the American people. And I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Robert Mueller lays out facts from 2017 that constitute obstruction of justice, but says the president cannot be indicted. Only Congress can apply the law to those facts. Many of us have been talking about impeachment since those facts emerged in 2017. Of course, today we focus on more recent crimes. So why did we talk of impeachment back when a Republican-led Congress would not act? Why do we impeach today when a Republican-led Senate is unlikely to act? First, because it is our constitutional duty, no matter what the political consequences. Second, because it is the most effective tool to chasten and restrain a president who is not naturally feel constrained by the rule of law. I would note that the president's attempt to extort Ukraine was secretive and furtive, far different from his modus operandi of blazing threats that we saw in 2017. We can only imagine what high crimes and misdemeanors this president would have boldly committed had no one been talking about impeachment then, had he felt immune from impeachment. Today we will demonstrate that the president is not above the law.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It would have been nice if they had actually thought those crimes were bad enough to put in the articles. They didn't. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, do you know who doesn't think the Democrats have presented enough testimony or evidence to impeach President Trump today? It's the Democrats. Sure, here in the House, Democrats running this inquiry have declared they've done everything needed. They have all the testimony and evidence necessary to impeach right now. But right now, down the hall, Democrats in the Senate are saying the exact opposite. They're complaining. They need more evidence and more testimony because Senate Democrats know that House Democrats have built them a house of cards impeachment. An impeachment built by the same Democrats who told America, trust us, President Trump committed treason. He's a Russian agent, and we've got evidence, which of course proved to be totally false. And to quote the favorite phrase of one member of this House, they got caught. Along the way, those same Democrats said, trust us. The FISA law and court weren't abused by the Obama administration using Democratic opposition research dossier against the Trump campaign and President Trump. Again, totally false, and again, they got caught. And when Democrats started this latest impeachment inquiry, they said, trust us. We have not yet spoken to the whistleblower. Again, totally false, and they got caught. Sadly, my Democratic colleagues have placed their own credibility in the hands of members of this body that have no credibility left, members that nobody trusts because they keep getting caught betraying America. But unless a bolt of courage and integrity strikes that side of the room in the next hour, history will reflect that Donald Trump is the third president to be impeached. History may also shortly reflect that he'll be the first president to be reelected after being wrongfully impeached. And if that happens, Democrats won't be able to hide behind a pretend veneer of caring about the Constitution. History will record the Democrats' legacy as a betrayal of the Constitution because the founders meant for impeachment to be used for actions so extraordinary, so rare that it's happened 3 times in 2.5 centuries. It wasn't meant for congratulatory phone calls where there's no crime alleged, where there's no victim, and where the Democrats themselves couldn't even decide what to accuse the president of doing wrong before ending up with this embarrassment of a grab bag of abuse of power article. An obstruction of Congress, to even allege it, is an admission of constitutional illiteracy. The founders had a term for what the Democrats call obstruction of Congress. The founders called it the separation of powers. And the funny thing about obstruction, every time Democrats get caught trying to frame this president for some crime he didn't commit, they follow up by accusing him of obstructing their efforts to frame him for the things he never did in the first place. The founders warned and feared today might come when impeachment was used politically by the party that had the most votes. Today, Democrats are the founders' worst nightmare come true. I think most Americans are probably wishing they could impeach the Democrats. To them, I say, you can next November. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I think when the history of this time is written, it will record that when my colleagues found that they lacked the courage to stand up to this unethical president, they consoled themselves by attacking those who did. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
That objection is so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent for the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for her request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting my vote for the impeachment of Donald J. Trump.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Wexton, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I'm now proud to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquarello, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we're here today because of the failure of so many to cast aside narrow ambition to confront the threat standing before us. Offered the chance to investigate this government together, the president and his party stonewalled and obstructed. We're here today because they choose comfort over courage and avarice over the republic. This is the ongoing tragedy of our age, and it is ongoing. The matter is now solely in our hands and belongs to us and us alone. The buck has stopped. Many have invoked the judgment of history as an antidote to this threat. But the threat to democracy is here today, not tomorrow. We need not, we must not await the verdict of time for Donald Trump's abuse of power and obstruction. We can offer that verdict right now, and we are.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker. The Democrats forgot two key things. Forgot about the facts and they forgot about fairness. 4 facts will never change. We have the call transcript, no quid pro quo. We have the 2 guys on the call, excuse me, who've repeatedly said there was no pressure, there was no pushing. We have the fact Ukraine didn't know aid was held up at the time of the phone call, and most importantly, Ukraine took no action, no announcement of investigation to get the aid released. But Democrats don't care. They don't care about the facts, and they sure don't care about the process. No subpoena power for Republicans, no Republican witnesses. During the depositions, Republicans were prevented from getting all their questions answered, but Democrats got every one of their questions. The witness responded to every one of theirs, but not Republicans. The chairman wouldn't let him in. Of course, the whistleblower, the anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, bias against the president, who worked for Joe Biden, was never compelled to testify. The guy who started it all. This is really about the president's been driving these guys crazy because he's getting things done. He's doing what he said he was going to do. He's having results. Taxes have been cut, regulations reduced, unemployment at its lowest level in 50 years, the economy growing. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court, out of the Iran deal, embassy in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, and a new NAFTA agreement coming tomorrow. But guess what? When you drain the swamp fights back. And they started attacking the president before the election even. July 31st, 2016, they opened the Russia investigation. The FBI spied on 4 American citizens associated with the Trump campaign. The FBI took the dossier to the FISA court, the dossier they already knew was false. They took it to the court, and they lied to the court 17 times. Guess what? 3 days ago on national television, even Jim Comey had to admit the FBI was wrong. And yesterday, 1 day ago, the FISA court sends the FBI a letter and says, straighten up, get your act together when it comes to the FISA application process. Think about this. Think about this. The attack started then and they've continued right up till today. But I want you to think about something. The individual who said the FISA process was fine, the dossier was fine, the Russian investigation was fine, that same individual ran the impeachment process. That same individual's staff met with the whistleblower. That same individual is the only guy in Congress who knows who the whistleblower is for sure. And that same individual released the phone records of the president's personal attorney, released the phone records of a member of the press, and released the phone records of a Republican member of the United States Congress. This process has been unfair, it's been dangerous, and it has been harmful to our country. Democrats have never accepted the will of the American people. Nancy Pelosi made that clear 4 weeks ago when she called the President of the United States an imposter. The will of we the people, the 63 million folks who voted for this guy and made him president in an electoral college landslide, they've never accepted that fact. We are less than 11 months away from the election. Let the American people decide who should be president. Let the American people decide. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to defend the Constitution and support these articles of impeachment. The President abused the power of his office by corruptly putting his own political interests ahead of our nation's security. He blocked congressionally authorized military aid to coerce Ukraine to launch a phony investigation into his political rival. In the months since, he has waged a campaign of absolute obstruction against Congress's constitutional authority, ordering all federal officials to defy subpoenas and refusing to produce even a single document. Madam Speaker, I take no joy in today's impeachment vote or that the President's actions demand this response. This is a sad moment for our nation. Only twice before has the House voted to impeach a president, and never before on accusations of compromising our nation's security. I hope in the Senate, prosecution and defense can call and cross-examine witnesses, and the senators will hear the evidence and make their decisions without prejudice or prejudgment. This is a solemn moment, but our system of checks and balances was designed for times like these, and I have faith that our Constitution will guide us on the path ahead. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes.
Gentleman's recognized for
Thank
3
you, gentlemen.
minutes.
Madam Speaker, as the Democrats now admit, their attempt to remove the president began on Trump's inauguration day, when the Democrats' semi-official mouthpiece, the Washington Post, declared, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." For years, the Democrats tried to expel the president with the preposterous accusation that he was a Russian agent. As detailed by I.G. Horowitz, dishonest intelligence officials used fake allegations spread by the Democrats to gain approval of a spying operation against the Trump campaign. As they falsely accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russians, the Democrats themselves colluded with Russians to manufacture these allegations in the infamous Steele dossier. They even tried to get nude pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters. With the Russian collusion hoax, the Democrats had everything going for them. Federal investigations run by Trump haters, an endless supply of media cheerleaders, and a galaxy of left-wing interest groups amplifying their ridiculous message. And yet, even with all those weapons at their disposal, the Russia conspiracy theory collapsed. So they quickly concocted Plan B. The Ukraine hoax was based on a supposed whistleblower who colluded beforehand with the Democrats. The Democrats then prevented Congress from interviewing the whistleblower while conducting bizarre secret depositions and selectively leaking testimony to discredited media hacks. The Democrats showcased the most useful witnesses in public hearings that somehow reduced support for impeachment. It's not easy to make a coup attempt boring, but the Democrats found a way. As it turns out, the American people don't think a routine phone call with a foreign leader is a good basis for ousting a U.S. president. The Democrats also put forth ever-changing accusations against the president, including campaign finance violations, quid pro quos, election interference, bribery, extortion. Eventually, they ended up with the ridiculous charges we consider today: abuse of power, an utterly meaningless term, and obstruction of Congress. One Democrat has pronounced the president guilty simply because he won't cooperate with their plan to railroad him. But the only thing President Trump is guilty of is beating Hillary Clinton. The Democrats refuse to accept that loss, and now they're indicating they'll continue their impeachment efforts even after this one fails in the U.S. Senate. Madam Speaker, after all their deceit, phony investigations, ginned-up crises, and manufactured outrage, the Democrats need a long period of rehabilitation. They must learn how to do something productive for the American people instead of ripping the country apart in their lust for power. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and it's now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Chairman Neal, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is deeply unfortunate that we have to undertake this impeachment proceeding that unfolds this evening. But the part we play in this process is not optional. Among other things, as the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees have painstakingly documented, the President has indeed abused his authority, and he has indeed obstructed justice. He threatened to withhold congressionally appropriated U.S. taxpayer dollars from an ally under attack from Russia unless they agreed to interfere in our election on his behalf. He has expressed no remorse, and he continues to maintain that his behavior was, quote, perfect, while simultaneously obstructing legitimate congressional oversight and subpoenas and blocking members of his administration from providing truthful testimony to investigators. His actions are so far beyond the pale that they have left us with no remaining recourse except impeachment, and so we shall impeach. Because as drastic and as unwelcome as this step is, our country faces even greater long-term risk if we fail to respond. We cannot excuse a president who feels entitled to disregard or break the law with impunity. We are a nation built upon the rule of law, not the law of rulers. The framers gave us their best effort in 1787, and indeed it was an extraordinary one. The Constitution they set down wasn't perfect, but it founded a republic that has endured and thrived with exceptional stability. As the late Senator Moynihan pointed out, only 2 countries in the world both existed in 1800 and have never had their governments changed by violence since then, the United States and Britain. Only 8 governments have existed since 1914 and have not had their form of government changed by force since then. The United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden, and Switzerland. The innovative system of checks and balances that they constructed with the separation of powers brought about and successfully negotiated a generation of challenges that we have sustained. In the very first week that the framers began crafting this blueprint for America's freedom and stability, and negotiations indeed immediately started on impeachment. No government in the world at that time exposed the head of government to impeachment, but America was to be different. In the view of the framers, impeachment is in no way a constitutional crisis. It is a process that the framers wisely judged that we would sometimes need. This evening is one of those rare moments. Madison worried that one day the country would elect a president who, quote, might pervert his administration to a scheme of peculation or oppression. He might betray his trust to foreign powers, end of quote. George Mason asked the delegates, quote, shall we see any man to be above justice? And above all, shall that man be above it, then who can commit the most extensive injustice? End of quote. Of course not, because having just thrown off one king, they would never consent to anoint another one. America firmly rejected the notion of divine right. Speaker Rayburn summed it up, but I have 30 extra seconds, Mr. 30 extra seconds.
Without objection.
Thank the gentleman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Article 1 of the Constitution prescribes Congress as the first branch of government. And just as importantly, let me quote Speaker Rayburn, who was asked, how many presidents did you serve under? And Speaker Rayburn answered, none. I served with 7 presidents of the United States. Impeachment is reserved for moments of grave danger when the constitutional order becomes dangerously out of balance, moments like this one, and that's why I will vote to impeach.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield a minute 45 to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Ferguson.
Gentleman's
45 seconds.
recognized for 1 minute, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, here we are, on the verge of doing exactly what America doesn't want us to do and what they feared that you would do. In 2016, I, along with 63 million American voters, representing 304 electoral college votes, went to the polls and we raised our collective political middle finger to D.C. and voted for Donald Trump. Folks like my father who watched this place destroy his profession of community banking. My friends and family in the textile industry that saw their way of life destroyed following NAFTA. Americans in rural areas whose opportunity in life and voice have been drowned out by the screams of socialist Democrats. Our friends and neighbors living in poverty and crime, broken down, project-based public housing, who for generations have been told by this place, this is the best that we think that you can do. Here's your check. God bless you. Now move along. Those voters. And now you want to remove our voice from office. Well, our voice will be heard, and I stand here determined to make sure that it will be, because we will fight back against this corrupt and unfair impeachment process. How dare you, the liberal elites, the condescending bureaucrats, and every other kind of swamp critter in this godforsaken place tell the American public who the president should be. That's the job of the American voter, not yours. This whole flipping goat rodeo is a sham and a shame, and it will not be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this week Americans are busy finishing up their Christmas shopping, mostly for their children, or if they're lucky enough to have them, their grandchildren. And high school and college students are taking final exams and sweating out the results. And that got me to thinking about those who follow and what our obligation is to them. And that got me thinking about those who came before and how they might have seen their obligation to us. People like my grandfather, whom our family believes literally was born on the boat on the way over here from Germany. Or my father, who fought in World War II against the very people that his grandfather had left. We're all here today, all of us, because someone before us sacrificed so that they could journey here and build a new life in this unique land. And we are here today because those immigrants and their children were dedicated not just to the land of America, but to the idea, freedom and opportunity secured by self-government, choosing our own leaders in free and fair elections, and the rule of law under the Constitution.
Gentleman's time's expired.
2 minutes? Madam Speaker, happy to yield another 30 seconds to the gentleman from Washington.
Gentleman's recognized.
This idea of America is in peril, brought about so by this president who sought to cheat in an election. A president who puts himself above the law and attacks the bedrock constitutional precept of checks and balances. Yet the question is, can America survive this behavior? What idea will we hand down to those who follow us? And finally, what is our obligation to those who would follow? It is simply this: to do our duty, to defend the Constitution and the values underpinning it by voting yes on the articles of impeachment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I reserve, Madam Chair.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we live in the greatest democracy in the world, and I am convinced that the overwhelming majority of Americans are good, decent people who work hard and play by the rules. But then we have people who have no respect for the law, people who have little regard for the rules, people who spend a lot of their time trying to figure out how to game the system. Law enforcement officers call them habitual offenders. And the more they get away with, the more likely they are to engage in misconduct. Some say it takes courage to hold powerful people accountable, but I see it differently. I see it as a sense of duty, a regular part of my job as a member of Congress. However, habitual offenders usually don't sneak up on you. They usually telegraph their intentions time and time again. On July 27th of 2016, in my home state of Florida, then candidate Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you will be able to find the 30,000 emails, thereby inviting foreign interference into U.S. elections." But then the day after the special counsel testified before Congress, the president, feeling undeterred and emboldened, said, "Call President Zelensky," and pressured him to help him rig the elections, and chose to hold much-needed military aid over our allies' head until the president's demands were met. Now, I served 12 years on the hostage negotiations team, and I know that pressure and demands come in many forms. And in this scheme, we had both. I've enforced the laws, and now I write the laws. But the laws mean nothing if the accused can destroy evidence, stop witnesses from testifying, and blatantly refuse to cooperate. I ask you to name somebody in your community or your family who can do that. I know the president said that he can get away with anything he wants to. I come today to tell you that no, he cannot, because no one is above the law, and he shall be held accountable.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this moment, I yield for a unanimous consent request. The gentleman from Arkansas,
Gentleman's
Mr. Crawford.
recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter my remarks into the record in opposition to this sham impeachment.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. And Madam Speaker, I rise today on the floor of this magnificent chamber, the very heart of our democratic republic. And I would imagine, Madam Speaker, that every one of us in this chamber, regardless of party, understands, shares a common view that being citizens of this great republic is among life's most tremendous blessings. We all know that no force on earth is more powerful than the force of freedom. It is our miraculous constitutional system, Madam Speaker, defended by our men and women in uniform, that has safeguarded that freedom for 230 years. Each one of us in this chamber bears a sacred duty, passed down to us through generations and affirmed in our oath of office, to preserve and protect our Constitution. Madam Speaker, our nation's framers recognized that this republic is fragile and that extreme partisanship can be among the most severe threats to its survival. That is why in Federalist 65, Alexander Hamilton wrote, quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the impeachment decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Here, Madam Speaker, our Democratic colleagues have been working to remove this president since the day he was elected, searching for an offense on which they could impeach. Failing to find one, Madam Speaker, they have decided to assume one. Rather than attempting to enforce their subpoenas in court, they have also decided to declare it a high crime and misdemeanor when the President of the United States asserts his constitutional privileges. The Democrats are asking members of this body to impeach, despite the fact that they have presented no direct evidence of any impeachable offense. Let me say it one more time, Madam Speaker. They have presented no direct evidence of any impeachable offense. If anyone in this chamber still believes the Democrats have proven their case, I would urge those members to ask the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Schiff, why he failed to appear to answer questions about his report. Before members vote for impeachment, they might want to know why the author of the impeachment report will not defend it under questioning. If the House impeaches here, Madam Speaker, it will create exactly the type of risk the framers cautioned us to avoid. It will mean that divided government can imperil a democratically elected president based on unproven allegations and innuendo in the absence of direct testimony. Despite all the rhetoric you've heard today, Madam Speaker, passage of these articles of impeachment may permanently damage our republic. From this day forward, a hyper-partisan, bare majority can cite this precedent to try to remove a future commander-in-chief. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, Madam Speaker, think of our republic, think of the Constitution, think of the oath that we all swore to protect and defend that Constitution, and vote against these partisan, reckless, and dangerous articles of impeachment. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today we proclaim that no person is above the law, not even the President of the United States. Donald J. Trump abused the power of his office and violated his oath of office by extorting a new and inexperienced president of a vulnerable foreign ally to dig up dirt on Mr. Trump's domestic political opponents. He then obstructed the Congress, this equal branch of our government, from undertaking our duty, outlined in the Constitution itself, to investigate and check these violations. Today, we do nothing more and nothing less than fulfill our duty to our country and to our Constitution. Mr. Trump has allowed foreign powers to interfere in our domestic affairs. He has endangered our national security and our democracy itself. For those reasons, we must impeach this president. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, at this point I have a yield for a unanimous consent request to the gentleman from Oregon.
Gentleman's recognized.
I oppose this resolution on impeachment and ask that my words be put in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I have unanimous consent request from the gentleman from South Carolina.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I oppose these resolutions. I ask for my comments to be admitted into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent for the gentleman from Mississippi.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I oppose the articles of impeachment and like my comments be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, reserve the balance of my time.
Who seeks recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask of the gentleman, is he ready to close?
No, we have a few more speakers.
Then I reserve.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espiat, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, if you live in Lenox Avenue in the village of Harlem in my district, you are not above the law. If you live on Webster Avenue in the Bronx part of my district, you are not above the law. If you live in Washington Heights, the immigrant neighborhood in my district, you are not above the law. So I submit to you that if you live on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, you are not above the law, and you will be held accountable. President Donald Trump asked Ukrainian president to do us a favor and look into the Biden. That's abuse of power. President Trump used the official White House meeting to extort a Ukrainian president. That's abuse of power. President Trump ordered White House staff to withhold $400 million in aid to the Ukraine. That's abuse of power. President Trump and his staff defied multiple subpoenas from Congress. That's obstruction of Congress. He blocked witnesses from testifying before this body. That's obstruction of Congress. Nadie está por encima de la ley. No one is above the law. I cast my vote for this impeachment, articles of impeachment, and I ask my colleagues to do the same.
From Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield for unanimous consent request from the gentleman from Virginia.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter my statement into the record, recording that I am opposed to this articles of impeachment on the basis that they do not measure to Article 2, Section 4.
Yeah. I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Brownlee, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as the chair of the Women's Veterans Task Force, I see every single day the immense sacrifice our women veterans and all of our nation's veterans have made in service to our country, in service to our Commander-in-Chief, our Constitution, to protect our democracy, and for every single man, woman, and child in our country. When the President of the United States used $400 million meant to protect our national security in order to cheat in our elections, he not only abused his power, he turned his back on the sacrifices of our veterans and their families have made for all that we hold so dear. That abuse of power is reprehensible, and it is exactly what impeachment was designed to prevent. We have a solemn duty to protect our Constitution, to protect our democracy, and to honor all those who have laid their lives on the line for these United States of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield for a unanimous consent request to the gentlelady from Indiana.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Davis, for 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, make no mistake. We are not impeaching this president. He is impeaching himself. If you are the president and you obstruct justice, try to bribe a foreign leader, and threaten national security, you're going to get impeached. End of story.
Video's back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Holland, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I stand before you as a representative of New Mexico, a place where we believe in dignity and respect for all. In Congress, I've been fighting for them. We've been working to make health care more affordable, education accessible, and move our country forward for the people. But today, this president has forced us into a serious debate. We're talking about a president who used the power of the presidency for his own political gain, risking our national security and putting the integrity of the next election at risk. It's a sad day when a president shows complete disrespect for Congress as a co-equal branch of government and for the American people who elected us. We collected the evidence and the facts are indisputable. We all took an oath to protect and defend our Constitution. We have the solemn responsibility to hold this president accountable because it's our job. I urge my colleagues to live up to our responsibility and show our fellow Americans that no one, not even the President, is above the law, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this moment, I yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
And I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my statement in support of the articles of impeachment against President Donald J. Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves.
Thank you, Madam
Gentleman
Speaker.
from
At this
Georgia.
time, I give 5 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, the minority whip, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Impeaching a president of the United States. This isn't about some solemn duty tonight. Let's talk about what this is really about. This has been about a political vendetta that didn't just start with the Zelensky call. It started long before that. Just listen to some of the quotes from Democrats in this chamber. Speaker Pelosi, quote, "It's been going on for 22 months, 2.5 years actually. We cannot accept a second term for Donald Trump. What's more serious is that he can't win. This isn't about some crime that was committed. It's about fear that he might win re-election. That's not why you impeach a president." Al Green, quote, "I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected." The list goes on, Madam Speaker. In fact, there's some quotes that I can't even read on this House floor that some of our colleagues made. And keep in mind, more than 100 Democrats on this House floor voted to impeach this president before the Zelensky phone call. Just look at some of these articles of impeachment that they voted for. 2 years ago, 58 Democrats voted to impeach the president over comments he made about NFL players kneeling for the Pledge of Allegiance. Impeaching the president, over 50 Democrats voted to impeach him for that. Just this summer, over 90 Democrats voted to impeach the president for comments he made about the squad. So he makes comments about some other members of Congress who make a lot of comments about him, and 95 members vote to impeach the President of the United States. This is a political vendetta. It has nothing to do with a crime committed. There was no crime. And why don't we listen to some of the witnesses? Obviously, we weren't able to call all the witnesses we wanted, but there were witnesses. In fact, Gordon Sondland, U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, he's mentioned over 600 times in the Schiff report. He was their star witness. And what did he say when asked? Quote, "Did President Trump ever tell you personally about any preconditions for anything?" His answer, no. Any preconditions for the aid to be released? No. Any preconditions for a White House meeting? Under oath he testified, no. Abuse of power. Let's talk about that article of impeachment, Madam Speaker. George Washington law professor Turley, who admitted under oath that he voted against Donald Trump, spoke to this claim of abuse of power. In fact, he said, quote, "If you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You are doing precisely what you are criticizing the president of doing. Abuse of power." There's a House rule, Madam Speaker, that requires, not allows, but requires that the minority get a day of hearing, which we asked for multiple times. They broke this rule. They didn't allow us to have a minority day of hearing. They didn't want to hear the facts about this case because it was never about the facts, because there was no crime. It is about a personal political vendetta. Now let's talk about obstruction of Congress, as they make up these terms to impeach a president because they didn't find a crime, and they were looking. It's been an impeachment in search of a crime. But they talk about obstruction of Congress and saying the president defied subpoenas, subpoena after subpoena. Let's go through the departments. The Department of State they subpoenaed. Do you know that literally just 4 days after the subpoena, the Secretary of State himself responded to your subpoena? The Department of Defense, a week later, responded to the subpoena. The Department of Energy, responded to the subpoena. We can go on and on with all of these agencies. That's an abuse of power. That's an obstruction of Congress. Responding to your subpoena, that's what they did. They responded. You might not have liked the answer, but that's not the way this works. You don't impeach a president because you don't like his foreign policy, as so many of those foreign policy experts came and testified. But this isn't just about Donald Trump. They don't just hate Donald Trump, Madam Speaker. They hate the 63 million Americans who voted for this president, the forgotten men and women of this country who had been left behind, Madam Speaker.
House will be in order. Gentlemen may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's those forgotten men and women of this country that Washington had left behind. And what's this president doing for them? He's delivering for them. 600 jobs in Pennsylvania. 1,000 jobs, workers in Mingo Junction, Ohio. $750 million investment for 600 new jobs across this country. Detroit News, Chrysler, 6,500 new jobs. That's what this president is doing to deliver for those men and women of this country who had been left behind. It's about time somebody stands up for him, and President Trump is. So it is a political vendetta. But if they're going to go through with this, Madam Speaker, impeachment will not just be a stain on this Democrat majority. Impeachment will be their legacy.
Members
I yield
are
back.
reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize Ms. Custer from New Hampshire for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I request the consent, unanimous consent for enter in my statement into the record regarding the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge in favor of articles of impeachment. Thank you.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, it is now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, Mr. Hoyer, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
My colleagues,
The gentleman will suspend. The House will come to order. Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have had the honor of serving in this House for over 38 years. I've served during 6 presidencies. I've been here through moments of tremendous progress and terrible tragedy. I've seen periods of rank partisanship and patriotic bipartisanship. I've seen our two-party system work, and I've seen it break down. Never, in all my years of serving in this great institution that I love, and the people of my district, did I ever expect to encounter such an obvious wrongdoing by a President of the United States. Nor did I expect to witness such a craven rationalization of presidential actions, which have put our national security at risk, undermined the integrity of our elections, and defied the constitutional authority of the Congress to conduct oversight. We've heard from Republicans that this impeachment really has to do with policy differences or how we feel personally about the president, about his temperament, or that we simply dislike him. Throughout the Trump presidency, Democrats have resisted pursuing impeachment, even as we watched with dismay and disgust at a pattern of wrongdoing. That pattern included ordering federal agencies to lie to the public, firing the FBI director for refusing to end investigations of his campaign, siding with Vladimir Putin against our intelligence agencies, taking funding away from the military to put towards an ineffective border wall, and setting policies that have led to the separation of families and caging of children. We have to be sure deep disagreements with the policies and actions taken by this president. There's been a lot of talk about the 63 million people who voted for Mr. Trump. Little talk about the 65 million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. The policy difference, or those votes, this president was elected legitimately.
The House will stay in order. The gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman's recognized.
Because we have an electoral college. But none of these are reasons to pursue what Chairman Schiff has called a wrenching process for the nation. In fact, Democrats rejected that process emphatically in 3 specific votes. In December of 2017, Democrats overwhelmingly voted against pursuing articles of impeachment, including the Speaker and myself. We did so again in 2018, with over 60% of the Democrats rejecting pursuing articles of impeachment. And again, just months ago, in July of 2019, 60% of the Democrats said no to pursuing articles of impeachment. Just days before the infamous July 25th telephone call. We did the same with 60% of Democrats voting not to proceed. Credible witnesses, many of whom were appointed to office by President Trump, have corroborated the details and timeline of his abuse of presidential power, which forms the basis of the first article of impeachment in this resolution. Instead, I will not recount all of the witnesses or abuses that have occurred. I congratulate my colleagues and Mr. Nadler and his committee and Mr. Schiff and his committee for setting forth a compelling case. They've been laid out fully in the articles before us and by colleagues in their remarks. What I will do is remind Americans that the House provided President Trump every opportunity to prove his innocence, but the witnesses were precluded from coming forth. The witnesses who have personal knowledge did not come, either at the president's request, in which he refused to show up because he thought it was a sham, as so many of you have said, or to the committees. Instead, he ignored congressional subpoenas for documents and for testimony by White House officials and ordered his subordinates not to cooperate. Perhaps they could have exonerated him. This itself, I suggest to you, is unprecedented. When President Nixon and Clinton were asked to hand over documents and allow officials to testify, ultimately both complied because it is the law. Such actions of the president can be taken as further evidence of his obstruction and abuse of power. It is, in and of itself, impeachable conduct, the subject of the second article of impeachment. These two articles before us concern two very profound constitutional issues about the abuse of power in our republic. First, whether it is acceptable for the President of the United States, any president, to solicit foreign interference in our elections. There is a difference as to whether he's done that, and the place to try that is in the United States Senate. But we believe strongly there is probable cause to conclude that. To undermine our national security, the integrity of our elections, and the integrity of our democracy. And secondly, whether it is permissible for the President to obstruct Congress and act as if he is above the law and immune from constitutional oversight. On December 4th, the Judiciary Committee heard the testimony of constitutional law experts who weighed in on these points. Some 1,500 historians have said the same thing. As Professor Noah Feldman said, if we cannot impeach a president who abuses his office for personal advantage, we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a monarchy, or we live under a dictatorship. The votes we are about to take concern the rule of law and our democracy itself. Let us not forget the words of John Locke, so influential to the founders of our republic. John Locke, millennia ago, said this: wherever law ends, tyranny begins. This impeachment asks whether we are still a republic of laws, as our founders intended, or whether we will accept that one person can be above the law. In America, as we have said over and over again, no one is above the law, but only as long as we hold every person accountable for breaking the law, even a president, will that be true. If the House does not act, if we wait and delay, we run the risk of allowing the president's misconduct, if we believe it to be so, to be repeated at the expense of the integrity of our elections, our national security, and our constitutional system of separation of powers. Democrats did not choose this impeachment. We did not wish for it. We voted against it. We voted against it once. We voted against it twice. We voted against it 3 times as recently as July. We did not want this. However, President Trump's misconduct has forced our constitutional republic to protect itself. These votes that we are about to take and the process that will follow in the Senate are not only an assessment of the President's commitment to the Constitution or to his oath of office, it is, as well, a test of our own. Damning evidence of the President's high crimes has emerged. Nevertheless, Republican members of this House and of the Senate have continued to defend a president whose actions seem to many of us to be indefensible. All of us feel a sense of loyalty to party. It's what makes our two-party system function. is what helps hold presidents and majorities accountable. But party loyalty must have its limits. And as evidence of the president's impeachable offenses have mounted daily as the witnesses testified, it has become increasingly clear that the limits of partisanship have been reached and passed. Now Democrats and Republicans together face a test before our constituents, our countrymen, and our Creator. The New York Times on October 18th summarized the question now posed to House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats. Compromise by compromise, Donald Trump has hammered away at what Republicans once saw as foundational virtues: decency, honesty, responsibility, and yes, even civility. Went on to say, will they commit themselves and their party wholly to Mr. Trump, embracing even his most anti-democratic actions? Or will they take the first step towards separating themselves from him and restoring confidence in the rule of law? Madam Speaker, we have seen Republican courage throughout our history, from the Civil War to the Cold War. In 1950, Margaret Chase Smith, the senator from Maine, a Republican, spoke bravely against the cancer of McCarthyism in her party, leading 6 of her Republican colleagues in a declaration of conscience against their own leadership. We are Republicans, they declared, but we are Americans first. In 1974, one congressman took the brave and principled step of becoming the first Republican on the Judiciary Committee to support impeaching President Nixon. He said to his colleagues and to the country, and I quote, "It isn't easy for me to align myself against the president to whom I gave my enthusiastic support, on whose side I've stood in many legislative battles, whose accomplishments in foreign and domestic affairs I've consistently applauded. But it is impossible," he went on to say, "for me to condone or ignore the long train of abuses to which he has subjected the presidency and the people of this country. The Constitution and my own oath of office," he said, "demand that I bear true faith and allegiance to the principles of law and justice upon which this nation was founded." And he concluded, "And I cannot, in good conscience, turn away from the evidence of evil that is to me so clear and compelling." My colleagues, that congressman's name was Larry Hogan Sr. He represented the 5th District of Maryland, which I now represent. His son is presently the 2nd-term Republican governor of our state. When Larry Hogan Sr. died in 2017, every obituary led with praise for his act of political courage. Who among us, many years from now, will receive such praise as a man or woman of courage? Who will regret not having earned it? We've talked a lot about partisan differences. There is one person who has spoken today who is neither a member of the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party. His name is Justin Amash, who represents a Republican district. He left the Republican Party, and in doing so, he admonished his colleagues that, quote, "This president will only be in power for a short time, but excusing his behavior will forever tarnish your name. He spoke on this floor in support of the two articles that we will consider this evening. Neither a Democrat nor a Republican. Representative Amash, of course, is the only member of this House who has no allegiance to either party, but to his country. He is supporting, as I've said, both articles. We need not ask who will be the first to show courage by standing up to President Trump. The question we must now ask is, who will be the last to find it? The pages of our history are filled with Americans who have the courage to choose country over party or personality. But as President Kennedy wrote, the stories of past courage can teach. They can offer hope. They can provide inspiration. But they cannot supply courage itself. For this, President Kennedy said, each man, each woman must look into their own soul. I urge my fellow colleagues in the House and, yes, in the Senate to look into your soul. Summons the courage to vote for our Constitution and our democracy. I understand we will all not see the same conclusion, but to do less betrays our oath and that of our founders, who pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. Let us neither turn away from the evidence, which to me seems so clear, nor from our good conscience, which compels us to do what in our hearts we know to be right. Let us not allow the rule of law to end or for tyranny to find its toehold. With our votes today, we can bear true faith and allegiance to the vision of our founders, and we can show future generation what it truly means to be Americans first. Vote yes.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, a few weeks ago, just off of this floor, I said that a dark cloud was descending upon this body. And today, because of the clock and the calendar, it is closing. It is amazing to me what I just heard from the majority leader, that Mr. Schiff and Mr. Nadler presented a compelling case for impeachment. If this is a compelling case for impeachment, I'm not sure why we're here right now. It is not anywhere close to compelling. But you know what is interesting is what I have heard today. The majority leader just spoke and said that if the president was given every opportunity to come prove his innocence. I tell you what, Madam Speaker, let me have just a few minutes, stop the clock, and let me go around to the press corps and to everybody here, and I'm going to accuse you of something. You did it. You did it. You did it. You did it. Now prove it's wrong. You did it. Guess what? You don't want to, because deep down you know that that's turning the entire jurisprudence of this country upside down. You're not guilty until you're proven. You're innocent. And today from this floor, we have heard the majority leader say this president is guilty and not the other way around. He is innocent, and these come nowhere close to proving it. But what is left of this body? Let's have an honest conversation, Madam Speaker. What we have found over the past few weeks is it is okay for the majority to tear down a foreign leader because they can't make their case. They've called him a liar or weak or worse, or as it was called in the committee, even looked like a battered wife. It is below the dignity of this body and this majority to tear down a foreign leader because they can't make their case against this one. We have broken rules in this House. Even to this moment, Chairman Schiff and the others have broken House Resolution 660 by not turning over the things that they should be turning over. I still have not got a transcript. We still don't know what we got. And the White House still has not got their stuff. I guess minority hearing rule days don't matter either. You see, there is a problem here because we're going to vote this tonight while breaking the rules. What a shameful incident. But we also found in creative interpretation of minority rights. We saw the rise of partisanship because of things that have been done even further. And we've even seen members smeared in reports by drive-by political hacks when they matched numbers of the majority or the ranking member and the members of the press. That ought to concern every one of you as much as it concerns every one of us. Nothing but a drive-by hit. But you know something? This majority leader also just said, wherever law ends, tyranny begins. But I will say this, in this House, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule actually begin, and the majority has taken that to a new level. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority saying, be damned with anything else, we're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority, and it ain't going to be that fun. Because when you look at it, when you actually trash the rules of this House, you ought to really look at what did you gain at the end by trashing the institution you claim to love. That's the things we found out so far. But you know, they're really careful of saying, oh, you want to deal in process and process. As I said last night in the Rules Committee where they didn't want to listen, I'll win on process and I will win on facts because we have the truth on our side. Let me remind you that here's what the process actually says. There was no pressure. Look at the call. President Zelensky, President Trump, no pressure. There was no conditionality. There was nothing done to get the aid, and the aid actually came. There were 5 meetings. But when you look at it right now, none of which matter, because right now the dark cloud is descending upon this House. And I am fearful, Madam Speaker. When I look out in that abyss, I don't know what I see, but I tell you what I do see. I see coming off a president who will put his head down even through this sham impeachment, and he will do his job. He will put the American people first. He will tell them that I care about you. He will still put the economy first, and he will make sure this country stands strong. That's what I see in this abyss. That's where we're going. And Madam Speaker, it is with that hope in the future that I recognize right now that I yield 1 minute to the Republican leader of this House, the Republican from California, Mr. McCarthy.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I must warn you, I'm about to say something my Democratic colleagues hate to hear. Donald J. Trump is President of the United States. He is president today, he'll be president tomorrow, and he will be president when this impeachment is over. Madam Speaker, when they accept that, maybe this House can get back to work for the American people. Now, tonight I rise not as the leader of the opposition to this impeachment, or as the elected representative from the Central Valley of California. I rise as Kevin McCarthy, citizen, no better, no worse than the 4,435 representatives that are in this chamber, or the 330 million Americans watching this institution make what I believe to be one of the worst decisions we have ever made. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're liberal or you're conservative, whether you're the first generation or the 10th, at our core, we are all American, all of us. We choose our future. We choose what kind of nation we want to be. Here is our choice tonight. Will we let impeachment become an exercise of raw political power, regardless if it damages our country? Or will we protect the proper grounds and process for impeachment now and in the future? For months, Democrats and many in the media have attempted to normalize the impeachment process that would remove a duly elected president from office. After 3 years of breathless and baseless outrage, this is their last attempt to stop the Trump presidency. Madam Speaker, Speaker Pelosi even recently admitted that Democrats have been working on this impeachment for 2.5 years. Those were her words, they were not mine. Because they lost to him in 2016, they'll do anything or say anything to stop him in 2020. That's not America. That's not how democratic republics behave. Elections matter. Voters matter. And in 11 months, the people's voice will be heard again. Impeachment is the most consequential decision Congress can make other than sending our men and women into war. Yet 85 days ago, Speaker Pelosi chose to impeach the President of the United States. She wrote the script and created an artificial timeline to make the details fit. Why else are we doing this just hours before Christmas? If that's all it was, a rush to judgment, she could be forgiven. But before the Speaker saw one word or one shred of evidence, she moved to impeach. In the past, in this body, such a step demanded a vote from all of us from the start. But not only did she move to impeach before she gave this House and the hundreds of millions of people we represent a say in whether to pursue an impeachment inquiry, she threw out the bipartisan standards this House gave President Nixon and Clinton. That is why I immediately sent Speaker Pelosi a letter asking her to follow the rules of history, of tradition, and follow those standards that have served America well. What did she say? She rejected it. She rejected it because Democrats knew a fair process would crumble their case. A fair process would have exposed to the American public what many already knew. Democrats have wanted to impeach President Trump since the day he was elected. And nothing was going to get in their way, certainly not the truth. Madam Speaker, Chairman Schiff said he had evidence, more than circumstantial, of collusion. That was false. In January, where we all stood in this body, we stood up, we raised our hands, we swore that we'd uphold the Constitution. And a few mere hours after that, Congresswoman Tlaib said she was going to impeach the mother effer. Those are not my words. A year before taking the majority, Chairman Nadler campaigned to the Democrats that he wanted to be chairman of the Judiciary Committee where impeachment is. The New York Times writes, Madam Speaker, because he is the strongest member to lead a potential impeachment. And Congressman Raskin, a leading Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, one that the Democrats had represented in the Rules Committee for these articles just yesterday, told a crowd he would impeach President Trump 2 days before he was ever sworn into office. What we've seen is a rigged process that has led to the most partisan and least credible impeachment in the history of America. That is this legacy. Any prosecutor in this country would be disbarred for such blatant bias, especially if that prosecutor was the fact witness the judge, and the jury. Madam Speaker, Democrats haven't just failed on process, has also failed on evidence. I've heard a lot of debate on this floor today, but I haven't heard one member of this body dispute this simple fact. President Trump provided lethal aid to Ukraine. It came before the call, it came after the call, and it continues to this day. President Trump provided Ukraine tank-busting bombs. The previous administration, they gave blankets. This is the truth. Meanwhile, the Democrats' case is based on second-hand opinions and hearsay. Simply put, there are no grounds for impeachment. As constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley, and I would challenge to say he's probably the most respected, and we all know it, a Democrat who did not vote for the president, said under oath there was no bribery, there was no extortion, no obstruction of justice, and no abuse of power. Based on the facts, based on the truth, based on the lack of evidence, Turley called this the fastest, thinnest, and weakest impeachment in the U.S. history. Such a definitive answer should be the end of all of this. But Speaker Pelosi is still moving forward with this impeachment without evidence of facts or truth or public support. The Speaker says it is out of allegiance to our founders. On this, I agree. I agree with the Speaker we should listen to the founders. And if one does, it's very clear that this impeachment is unfounded and improper. In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton wrote, there would always be the greatest danger, that impeachment would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. That impeachment would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. James Madison, another author of the Federalist Papers, wrote, the danger of legislative abuse must lead to the same tyranny as is threatened by executive abuse. The founders did not want impeachment to be used for political or partisan battles. If my colleagues do not want to follow the constitutional high standards for undoing a national election, perhaps you could have followed Speaker Pelosi's standard, at least the one she promised to follow back in March. It was a very sensible standard. She says impeachment is so divisive that the evidence must be overwhelming, compelling, and bipartisan. Not one of those criteria have been met today. Based on the facts, based on the evidence, based on the truth, this impeachment even fails that Pelosi test. Those now who say removing President Trump would protect the integrity of our democracy have it backwards. By removing a duly elected president on empty articles of impeachment, Congress will erode the public trust in our system of government. I understand you dislike the president, his beliefs, the way he governs, and even the people who voted for him. How do I know this? Because you say so day in and day out. In 2016, they even dismissed his supporters. Remember calling us deplorables? Now they are trying to disqualify our voice before the 2020 election. They want to undo the results of the last election to influence the next one. As I said, President Trump will still be president when this is all over. But Congress will have wasted months of time and taxpayers' dollars on impeachment rather than doing what America's people want us to do. It didn't have to be this way. Is this why we came here to serve? To trample on due process rights? To issue more subpoenas than laws? To appease the new Democrat socialist base? That is not leadership. That is raw political politics, and you know it. By refusing to acknowledge the truth or follow the facts, by substituting partisan animosity for real demonstration of innocence or guilt, and by continuing a 3-year effort to undermine the president, this impeachment has divided this nation without any concern for the repercussions. Moreover, politicizing this process has discredited the United States House of Representatives and could forever weaken the remedy of impeachment. To again quote Professor Turley, "It is the Democrats' rush to impeachment on these grounds with unfair procedures that is an abuse of power." History will write that. Madam Speaker, as I said at the beginning, we face a choice. Do you trust the wisdom of the people, or do you deny them a say in their government? Fortunately, the people will have the opportunity to speak up and render their verdict in 11 months to my fellow Americans. To my fellow Americans, if you approve of the way of this House has conducted their business, if you want to see your tax dollars go forward to endless investigations, support this impeachment. But if you want to restore a working Congress, like the previous Congress that listened to you and worked to bring the best economy in this country has ever seen, and one that once again will work with the President to get things done for you and your family, then join with us in rejecting this baseless impeachment. That's what's wonderful about this system of ours. We are a government of, by, and for the people. Always remember, we work for you, not the other way around. Now, I will say this stronger and with more conviction than I have ever said it before. In this time of great trial and tribulation, may God bless America. I yield back.
Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from California is recognized. House will be in order. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize myself for the remainder of our time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, my colleagues, after 8 hours, let us return to where we began with the articles themselves. Article 1 charges the President of the United States with abusing the power of his office by coercing an ally into cheating in a U.S. election on his behalf. It charges the President of the United States. It charges the...
Be in order. The gentleman has a right to be heard.
It charges the President of the United States.
The gentleman shall suspend. Gentleman may resume.
It charges the President of the United States with abusing his power by withholding official acts, by withholding a White House meeting that the President of Ukraine desperately sought to establish the support of his most important benefactor, the United States, by withholding hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid to a nation at war in order to get that nation to intervene in our election by smearing his opponent. That is the gravamen of the charge in Article 1. And what is the defense from my colleagues? Now, I've listened carefully to my colleagues for the last 8 hours, and I have to say, it's been hard for me to follow. But it amounts, I think, when you cut through it all, when you cut through all the sound and the fury, signifying nothing, what it really amounts to is this: why should we care? Why should we care about what the president did to Ukraine? Well, first of all, we should care about our allies. We should care about Ukraine. We should care about a country struggling to be free and a democracy. We used to care about democracy. We used to care about our allies. We used to stand up to Putin and Russia. We used to. I know the party of Ronald Reagan used to. Why should we care about Ukraine? But of course, it's about more than Ukraine. It's about us. It's about our national security. Their fight is our fight. Their defense is our defense. When Russia remakes the map of Europe for the first time since World War II by dint of military force, and Ukraine fights back, it is our fight too. And when the president sacrifices our interests, our national security for his election, he is sacrificing our country for his personal gain. That is the gravamen of Article 1. Article 2. Article 2 charges the President of the United States with obstructing the Congress, with denying the Congress any witness, any document, by telling all of his administration people, you will not appear. You will ignore a co-equal branch of government. And what is the defense to this from my colleagues? Again, it is, why should we care? He is the president of our party. Why should we care if he ignores this Congress? Well, I remind my friends that he will not be the last president. There will be another president. And you may be one day, although you do not act like it, you may one day be in the majority. And you will want to hold a president accountable. And what will you say when that president says, you are a paper tiger, you have no oversight, I can ignore your subpoenas? What will you say? What will you argue? Well, no, that was different. Then we were in the minority. Then it was a Republican president. Will that be your argument? Is that how little faith you have in our democracy, in our Constitution? Is that how poorly you defend and uphold that Constitution? But finally, let me ask this question that overrides it all. Why should we care about any of this? And I will bring you to one conversation that came to light, because it's not the most important conversation, but in many ways, it is the most revealing. It took place on September 14th in Ukraine, when Ambassador Volker sat down with Andrei Yermak, the top advisor to Zelensky. And he did what he should do. He supported the rule of law, and he said, you, President, you, Andrei Yermak, should not investigate the last president, President Poroshenko, for political reasons. You should not engage in political investigations. And you know what Yermak said? Oh, you mean like you want us to do with the Bidens and the Clintons? And in that abrupt, brutal retort, we see why we should care. Because what he was saying is, you, America, have forgotten what it means to uphold the rule of law. You have forgotten what it means to say that no one is above the law. We are a struggling democracy, but even we know better than that. What is at risk here? What is at risk here is the very idea of America. That idea holds that we are a nation of laws, not of men. We are a nation that believes in a rule of law. When we say we uphold the Constitution, we're not talking about a piece of parchment. We're talking about a beautiful architecture. in which ambition is set against ambition, in which no branch of government can dominate another. That is what it means to uphold the Constitution. If you ignore it, if you say the president may refuse to comply, may refuse lawful process, may coerce an ally, may cheat in an election because he's the president of our party, you do not uphold our Constitution. You do not uphold your oath of office. Well, I will tell you this, I will uphold mine. I will vote to impeach Donald Trump. I yield back.
All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 767, the previous question is ordered on the resolution as amended. The question of adoption of the resolution as amended shall be divided between the two articles. The question now occurs on the adoption of Article 1. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Georgia.
Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I ask the ayes and nays on that vote.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Hey everybody, what's up? Okay, so right now obviously they are voting on the first article of impeachment, which is abuse of power, and then they will vote on the second one. So they got some time. Sorry, I started playing on my other device. So I'm just going to put on some music until the voting is done, because usually it's at least the time that is left on the screen, and they often take longer to finish the vote. So I'm just going to put on some Christmas jams for a little bit. If you haven't subscribed yet, then please do so by hitting the big red subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss our live streams. And you can follow us on Twitter. There's our handle, and our website URL is right there. And thank you for joining, everybody. Let's listen to some Christmas music. I need some jams.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh. O'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtail ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. A day or two ago, I thought I'd take a ride, and soon Miss Fanny Bright was seated by my side. The horse was lean and lame, misfortune seemed his lot. He got into a drifted bank, and then we got upset. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. Oh, bring us a figgy pudding. Oh, bring us a figgy pudding. Oh, bring us a figgy pudding and a cup of good cheer. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. We won't go until we get some. So bring some out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yeah, see, they take so long. Time is up. Time is up. Get to it. They're lucky I'm not there. The timer says 0. You're all still walking around. Okay, so I don't know when they're going to get to the actual, sitting down and calling out the vote. So I'm just going to leave the Christmas music off until they go to the next vote, because my 7-year-old is trying to vacuum his room, so I am not going to hear whenever they actually are like, okay, we're actually going to do it now. So, I'm sorry, you're all going to have to sit in silence. But let me know, I'm curious, what everybody's favorite Christmas song is, or holiday song in general. And, do you celebrate a wintertime holiday, and what wintertime holiday do you celebrate? And now my children are fighting, so I'm gonna go. Hopefully they'll get to it soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.
On this vote, the yeas are 230, the nays are 197, present is 1. Article 1 is adopted. The question is on adoption of Article 2. The question is on the adoption of Article 2. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? For what purpose
I
does
ask
the
for,
gentleman-
Madam Speaker, I ask for a
what
roll.
purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I ask for a roll call vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will still rise. That will be in order. A sufficient number have arisen. A recorded vote is orders. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
I'm sorry if that was echoing, because I had my other device on and stuff. Did you see Pelosi's face? Did you see her face? She was like, when she hit that gavel, she was like, my goodness gracious. Interesting. I mean, it still has to go to the Senate from here, so it's not like this is the, end all be all kind of thing, but that's what's going on. So it said just a 5-minute vote, so I'm not going to turn on music so that way I don't, sometimes I end up like just not getting back to my computer in time to turn the music off whenever the thing starts up again. So I'm not even going to try to do that. I'm just going to put it back on and we're just going to wait and see what happens.
On this vote, the yeas are 229, the nays are 198, present is 1. Article 2 is adopted.
Wow. Well, well, well. There you have it, folks. So,
Without objection, the motion to reconsider Article 1 is laid on the table. Without objection, the motion to reconsider Article 2 is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 7B of House Resolution 758, the House stands adjourned till 9 a.m. tomorrow.
oh my gosh, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Apparently. So I guess that means it's not going out to the Senate yet because they're reconsidering them? I'm not sure. You know, if anybody knows if that's what that means, go ahead and let me know in the chat, because I don't know, I get confused by all of this legal mumbo jumbo. So they passed both of them, though. Both of them got the amount of votes that they needed, which I believe is 218. So you saw, even with like all of the Republicans voting, it was still getting passed. Obviously, I think there was only one Democrat that didn't vote. So there's that, and no Republicans voted yay, apparently. So there's that information, because people are always interested in that. And I know that you can look up who voted what way, I believe, on the House of Representatives website. So if you're curious about that, to see how your representative or whatever, however they voted, then you can look it up on there. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'm going to put on some Christmas tunes quick. And have a great evening. Remember to subscribe and hit the thumbs up if you haven't. And if you are an independent journalist, on my other computer, I always have my other computer going on. And I need to stop doing that. I need to stop have it playing in the background, just like I need to stop playing the music and everything when it's over just a short spots, because, yeah, I can't get back to the computer in time to switch it off. So, make sure that you subscribe if you haven't. That way you don't miss our live streams. I will try to, live stream the hearing tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I think they said that they would reconvene. So I will try to stream that, or I might see if there is something that is a little bit more pressing going on, because I'm not sure if they're just going to be, again, going over all of the same stuff that they have been. So we shall see, and as always, we love to see your comments and see your opinions and stuff about what's going on, so go ahead and drop us a line, and you can follow us on Twitter and check out our website, thedailygreens.org. And oh yes, that's what I was saying. So if you're an independent journalist or an alternative media type, we have the full report that they keep referencing. The 600 and something page long report, we have that linked in the description box down below if you want to check that out. And it details what the actual, the evidence is and what exactly the articles are and all of that good stuff. So thank you for joining and watching, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.